This one I started by stretching watercolor paper. I've got a tutorial later on that shows you, a very quick tutorial that shows you how. Stretch watercolor paper on a board, but it was so taut when it dried that it started buckling the board. 300-gram watercolor paper. It doesn't need stretching, but I find it better if you do stretch it because you can put a lot of water down. My reference was an iPad pic that I took from looking over this Anstey's Cove where I'm staying at the moment, and used that as my reference. Okay, so I'm starting with some clean water, some wiping cloth, and a selection of brushes, normally soft hair brushes. And of course, my reference, my iPad reference in front of me, so that I'm not drawing, I'm going to paint directly. Once we've chosen our sort of brushes and our basic elements that we need, and my clear water, although I'm going to go for a bigger jar of water because I'm going to start with some big washes. And this palette is probably not going to cope with the amount of water that I need. And because it's stretched, I can put in a lot of water. I can actually have very watery color going there because I'm not worried about it buckling because it'll always come back to that shape. So I'm starting with a big wash. You could actually use bigger brushes for this. And I'm starting with clear water and then adding a little bit of color to it. I've always suggested working in layers. With watercolor, you can't cover up your dark areas and you can't cover up mistakes that you've made, or you can't go lighter. Once you put it down, you've put it down. So I've always proposed that you work in layers and light layers and build up, adding detail as you go. But because I'm not drawing, I'm painting directly here, I've got to be even more careful in a sense and plan it. So I'm drawing with the brush. I'm drawing with very light color drawing, for want of a better word. But I'm creating the outlines, I'm creating the shapes based on the reference that I've got. Here I'm just working around the coastline. You'll see it as it comes together. I'm not showing you the reference, maybe I should have done that. But here I'm creating sort of the wave effects, and this is the bay. It's a bay area with some white sandy rocks and some trees and a lot of foliage around there. So I'm going to build it up in layers. You'll see that I'm putting down some of the color, then I take it off as well. I dab it off or take a dry brush and start to pull some of that color back again. As I said, you can put in a lot of water. If you've got it taped down and stretched, you can actually play with a lot of water without the fear of it buckling and bending and doing its thing. I'm still working on the coastline here, so I'm building it up as we go. And I go back to the sky, and I'll start to create more of the sky, more of the clouds, adding little bits of other color coming in here, make it slightly more dramatic. Yeah, this is quite a long tutorial, but I've speeded it up a lot of places where I think you might stop you from falling asleep. So I've speeded it up quite a bit. I've gone back to the water here in this bay area. I go back and forwards all the time. I work in the sky, I work in the bit of the landscape. Now we take it slightly further. We've gone to the basics. What I didn't say here, which I didn't show you, was me putting down some of the rubber latex or the masking fluid. So the yellow areas that you're seeing here around below me at the base here and on the beach area, I've masked it out with rubber solution or masking fluid, which I'll rub off as we go. I'll rub off later on. It protects either the paper, keeps your white, pure white, or it protects colors underneath. So if you put down a color and you let it dry and then you paint with masking fluid on top of it, it'll protect that color should you take other brush colors or other colors and overlay them. So here I'm starting to work on some of the foliage. and you'll see again, you'll start to see it come together. I use basic sort of colors, and then I'll start to add to the colors as we go. You'll see that I'm working very wet on wet, and I'm building up the layers using basic sort of colors. As I said, I will get more and more detail as we go. And there are no rules. There really are no rules to watercolor painting or to any painting really. But they're different styles, and people adapt and they find out what suits them best in their own sort of styles. Some people work very, very broad, very rough and very loose with big broad brushes and things, and very little detail. And then you get other people who get very detailed and they work with quite dry brushes and quite small, detailed illustration more than painting. I kind of work in between. I generally start off with very broad brushes and very big washes. And I tend to get more and more detailed and more definitive with finer brushes as I go, as I work. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I tend to be more of an illustrator when it comes to the detail as opposed to a painter. And I find it quite difficult sometimes to be very loose and very broad brushed. I don't quite know why. I think it's possibly, even though I started out as a fine artist, I think a lot of that has come through with me being an illustrator and having to document things that are quite accurate and quite detailed. Again, I'm going to speed this up every now and again because you don't really need to see the boringly repetitive detail. It'll all come together, and it's really showing you the principles of this and going from one color to the other color, washing your brushes, keeping your balance, I suppose is for want of a better word, the balance between the foreground and the background and the sky. Let's take it to the conclusion now. This is pretty much the final work, and then I start adding the detail, and I've taken off some of the masking fluid. I rub it away. This is me scraping, making sure that there is no rubber left on the paper. And you can use an ordinary eraser for that, or you can use a bit of that masking fluid that's dry like a ball, and you just dab it and take off the rubber. And now I'm starting to add the final sort of detail. Again, you can stop. I could have actually stopped here, but I'm going to take it further and take it some of the detail, and then we're going to finish it off. Right, I'm going to finish this off now. We're going to take it, as I've said, take it to its conclusion. So I'm just adding the final bits of detail. I won't show you in here, but ultimately what you do is you would cut your, because the chances are you're not going to be able to peel the brown sticky paper off your painting. So you'll have to cut the paper. So something to keep in mind or bear in mind if you're working on a certain size, that the brown paper will take up percentage. You want to bring in the brown paper as little as possible so that you've got the maximum amount of paper basically to paint on and to frame. But I'm going to have to cut this paper off using a nice scalpel or something, a nice sharp knife. Putting in the final detail here, basically finishing it off, and then I'm going to put it into a frame, and I'll just show you right at the end. We'll have a still picture of it sitting in a frame the right way up. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped you, and along with my other watercolor tutorials, my other painting tutorials. I hope this was beneficial and going to help you in some ways. until the next one, God bless, take care, and see you next time around.